of His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Om Agyan Timirandasya Janana Sakalaya Chaktum Militam Yena Tasme Sri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Iti Namane. I offer my respectful obeisances unto His Divine Grace, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who is very dear to Lord Krishna, having taken shelter at his lotus feet. Shri Varshavanavi Devi Daitaya Kripadaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Dayani Prabhave Namaha. I offer my respectful obeisances to Shri Varshavanavi Devi Dayitya Dasa, another name of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who is favored by Srimati Radharani and who is the ocean of transcendental mercy and the deliverer of the science of Krishna. Madhuya Jovla Premadya Sri Rupanuga Bhaktira Shri Gora Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute. I offer my respectful obeisances unto you, the personified energy of Sri Krishna Chaitanya's mercy, who deliver devotional service, which is enriched with conjugal love of Radha and Krishna, coming exactly in the line of revelation of Srila Rupa Goswami. Namaste Gauravani Sri Murtvaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Varudapa Siddhanta Dvantaharine. I offer my respectful obeisances unto you, who are the personified teachings of Lord Chaitanya. You are the deliverer of the fallen souls. You do not tolerate any statement which is against the teachings of devotional service, enunciated by Srila Rupa Goswami. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Please excuse my rough voice and occasional coughing. So in an attempt to remember, honor, and glorify Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, speak a few words about his background and provide some of his very intense and succinct instructions on devotional service and how to practice and achieve it. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was a foremost scholar and Lord Krishna's devotee. And today is his appearance day. He was born on February 6th of 1874 in Jagannath Puri. At that time, his father, Srila Bhakti Vinod, was a magistrate at Puri. And his father named him Bimala Prasad, meaning the mercy of Bimala Devi, who is the Parasakti of Lord Jagannath. Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur, who was a grand pioneer of Krishna consciousness, restoring the legacy of Lord Chaitanya and his pure teachings, had prayed to Lord Jagannath for a ray of Vishnu to act as an assistant, to assist him preaching Krishna consciousness in the line of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. 6 months later, after his birth, during the annual Rath Yatra festival in Puri, Lord Jagannath's cart came to a sudden halt right in front of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's home. While the people were trying to get the cart moving, Bhaktivinoda Thakur's wife, Bhagavati Devi, took opportunity to take the small baby, 6 months old, who was then Bimala Prasad, to see Lord Jagannath. Because she was the wife of Thakur Bhaktivinoda, who was also the manager of the Jagannath temple at that time, she was allowed to get on the cart for darshan of the Lord. And she took the baby and placed him at Lord Jagannath's lotus feet. And immediately, one of those huge garlands hanging around the Lord's neck fell off and encircled the baby. At that moment, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur knew beyond all doubts that this child was the answer to his prayers. In 1879, at the age of 5, Bhaktivinoda gave his son Harinam mantra and a Nrsimha mantra. And when he was 7 years old, he gave him a Kurma mantra to worship a self-manifested deity of Kurma that he himself, Bhaktivinoda, had discovered. Bhaktisiddhanta was actively preaching alongside his father from his early childhood years. And at the age 7, he could recite the entire Gita with understanding. In other words, he wasn't just parroting the words. If you asked him, explain, what does that mean? He was able to do that sufficiently. At the age of 18 in 1892, this is 4 years before our Srila Prabhupada appeared, if to give a little idea of the timeline. So 1892, he entered the Sanskrit University, and he received the honorific title Siddhanta Saraswati in recognition of his vast knowledge of astronomy and bhakti. He was extremely intelligent, and he excelled in math, astronomy, Sanskrit, and other languages. While the University of Calcutta offered him a
Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram Ram Hare Hare.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram.
Hello, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Okay, so you can hear now?
Yes, Mother.
Okay, well, we'll try this again. I don't have a place. I have a stand for my phone, but I don't have a flat surface to put it, so I'll do my best. Jagarini, see, now I'm going to get caught off because Jagarini called in. Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes, Mother. We can hear you. Yes.
Sorry, because somebody tried calling on my phone. Okay, so Hare Krishna. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta entered the Sanskrit University in 1892 at the age of 18. And I was mentioning at that point, it was 4 years before Srila Prabhupada, our Srila Prabhupada, took birth. And he was...
Sorry to interrupt. Would you mind, the video is off from your end.
Okay, probably better. Let me see.
This is perfect. Yes.
Can you see now?
Yes. Yes, Mother.
Well, we're having quite an interesting start here. So, where did I leave off?
You left off when the car.
I'm speaking to myself. I know. Okay, so we got past 1892. He goes to the Sanskrit. Okay, great. Can you hear me? Okay, is it all right? Great. So he was such an accomplished person at a young age that the University of the Sanskrit University gave him the title Siddhanta Saraswati. And then the University of Calcutta offered him a chair. That means a permanent position. But he declined because he wanted to dedicate his life to continuing the spiritual work of his father, Srila Bhaktivinoda. And an interesting occasion occurred in 1911. There was an all-Indian conference of pundits, and it was held at Midnapur. And Srila Bhaktivinoda was one of the primary speakers, but he was ill. So he sent his son, Bhaktisiddhanta, to take his place. And the audience was astounded he spoke on the comparative position of Brahman and a Vaishnava. So a Brahmana and a Vaishnava, that was his topic, and he just astounded the audience. And the president of the conference called him the other self of Srila Sukadeva Goswami. After he finished speaking, the whole crowd just started surging forward because they wanted to touch his feet. And it was a really quick-thinking law officer who saved him from being crushed. He took a bucket of water and he put Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's feet in the water. And then he took the water and he threw it all over the audience. And they were pacified by that gesture. And then in 1900, at the age of 26, he took initiation from Srila Gorakishore Das Babaji on the insistence of his father. And he received the name Sri Varsabhanavi Devi, meaning the servant of the daughter of King Vrishabhanu, Srimati Radharani. And of course, that was quite a dramatic occasion because he was trying, and he was not being accepted as his disciple because Gorakishore was not initiating. And he came home one day and told his father, just, no success. And his father was like, well, if you can't get initiated, your life is useless, So it happened to be he passed Gorakashore while crossing a bridge. So when we say confront, it usually means aggressive, but in this case, respectfully confronted him. And he told, if you cannot accept me as your disciple, I'm jumping off this bridge to my death. My life has no meaning. So then at that point, Srila Gorakashore understood that this young man was very serious and accepted him as his initiated disciple. And in 1905, at the age of 31, so that was age 31, and I'm mentioning these time frames to give some concept of his accomplishments at such a young age. So he took a vow at age 31 to chant 1 billion holy names of the Lord to prepare himself for teaching Krishna consciousness. And it took him 10 years to fulfill this vow. And during that time, he was living in a small bamboo hut. And then in 1915, at the age of 41, in front of his deity of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, he began in earnest to preach Krishna consciousness all over India, establishing Lord Chaitanya's mission with such vigor it was never seen before. He was referred to as the Simha Guru, the lion guru. And during his life of celibacy, he was a lifelong celibate. He had such a clear memory that even in his later days, he could recollect word for word any passage of any book that he had read 50 years back. How many of us could we read a page of the Bhagavatam and then somebody, what are you reading? We can't even remember. Kali Yuga has attacked us. In 1918, at the age of 44, this was following the death of his father in 1914 and the death of Srila Gorakashore Das Babaji in 1915. Bimala Prasad accepted the formal order of sannyas from a photograph of his guru. And at that time, he took the name Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami. And on that same day, he established his first Vaishnava monastery, Sri Chaitanya Mat at Sri Mayapur. And that became his preaching headquarters. All in all, he established around all over India, from north to south, east to west, 64 mats, 64 temples, initiated, and this is very interesting, initiated 60,000 disciples. He reestablished Braja Mandala Prikrama and Navadipdam Prikramas. He established printing presses in Mayapur, Delhi, Chennai, Chennai meaning formerly Madras, and other major cities. And he called these printing presses the bigger mridangas because the sound of a mridanga could only be heard from a limited distance, whereas books can traverse the entire earth. On December 31st, 1936, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur left his body at the age of 62 in Calcutta. He was surrounded by his disciples singing bhajans, and his life-size murti is worshipped at the Sri Chaitanya Math Mayapur. And of course, his murti form is also worshipped now in many, many ISKCON temples all over the world. And the care of the house where Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was born was later taken over by the Gaudiya Math. And now the house has been beautifully developed into a nice temple. There's quarters for devotees, etc. And again, his murti is being worshipped at that same spot. And an interesting note that when the devotees were digging the soil to construct this temple, suddenly this beautiful, nice smell of chandan manifested from that place where he took his birth. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had asked one disciple, Abhay Sharana Dasa Adhikari, to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. And that disciple later became A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, our most wonderful Srila Prabhupada. And he took his spiritual master's instructions as his life and soul, and he spread Krishna consciousness worldwide through his International Society for Krishna Consciousness, ISKCON, which he created to fulfill that instruction. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was a very innovative, courageous preacher. So in the 1930s, as a sannyas, he had a limousine. He wore a dhoti on occasions, and he would put on a double-breasted coat, like a proper English coat, because they were like, under the British. And not to bow down to the British, but I'll explain in a moment. Stockings, he wore stockings and shoes according to the occasion. And for receiving special guests, he had very nice furniture. And in referring to the elite, he commented, "We are preaching by approaching the people of the world, dressed even somewhat better than they, showing knowledge even somewhat greater than theirs, being even somewhat more stylish than they, without which they would think us worthless and not even listen to our Harikatha. I have to go various places for propagating Harikatha, so I must present myself as a learned and decent gentleman. Otherwise, non-devotees will not give me the place of time." So he used all means to broadcast the message of Krishna, exemplifying Yukta Vairagya. At the time, like I mentioned, he had this limousine. And at that time, there was a widespread conception that, a sadhu would never go in what they considered an artificial conveyance. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, inheriting from his father the broader vision of spreading Krishna consciousness and doing good in the world, accepted such conveyance in order to reach further, to bring his message further into society. And that was also shown how, you can see these pictures, he's in that big, huge limousine, and he has on a very nice double-breasted coat, and he's going to see some proper people. Once Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur was giving a talk in the temple. Actually, if you want to point back to that, he also would use like electronic microphone, etc. And he was pointing out that renunciation doesn't mean giving up something that can be used favorably in Krishna service. If you do so, then actually it is false renunciation. So once Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was giving a talk in a temple, and the setup had a lecture hall adjoining the temple room. So he was speaking from the lecture hall. And in the middle of the lecture, a conch sounded for Arti. And some of the disciples stood up and they went to the next room, leaving the lecture to join the Arti. So when they returned, Bhaktisiddhanta stopped speaking. He asked, "Where did you go?" As if he didn't know. And he said, "Where did you go?" And the disciples were a little proud. And they said, "Oh, Guru Maharaj, we went to see Krishna on the altar." And he got annoyed, saying, "No, you only saw a stone. If you want to see Krishna, you must listen to me and hear from me. Then you can understand what is Krishna." That activity, what they did, leaving the lecture, is minimizing the spiritual master. Neglecting the instruction of the spiritual master is one of the offenses to chanting. And this is widely seen nowadays in my travels. The most blatant example is during Srila Prabhupada's Guru Puja, the morning Guru Puja, there will be people wandering around the temple, talking to each other, or some people will stand in front of the deities while Prabhupada's Guru Puja is on, meaning their backs to Prabhupada, looking at the deities. Now, what is this? And here Srila Bhaktisiddhanta clearly says what it is, that you are seeing only stone. So we have to be very careful to be faithful to Guru and Krishna. One time at Radhakund, when Srila Prabhupada came to hear a spiritual master, a similar situation occurred. And some of the devotees, they weren't even there at the lecture, and some, they left out. So it turned out that they weren't going to an arti, they were going to some parikrama to see some local holy spot. And Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhupada, was clearly disturbed by their apathetic attitude. And he mentioned when he saw our Srila Prabhupada, he just sat there. He didn't go. And he said, I have noted this boy, he likes to hear. No. So our Srila Prabhupada once commented, it was in a letter to his disciple Upendra in 1972, I never asked my spiritual master any questions except one, how can I serve you? So that is very instructive. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati instructed, if we take shelter of the lotus feet of the spiritual master, we can become free from illusion, fear, and distress. If we wholeheartedly beg for his mercy without any deceit, then the spiritual master bestows all auspiciousness upon us. In speaking about the proper mood for devotees towards the society's temple, he taught that it's more intelligent to create a living mutt, a living temple, rather than build a mutt for comfortable living. And he explained that creating a living mutt means to attract faithful persons to surrender at the lotus feet of the spiritual master. The mutt is surcharged with talk of Krishna's glories, and service is non-different from Vaikuntha. So when living in the mutt, in such a place where Krishna's glories are being extolled and Krishna's service is being promoted, it is just like living in the holy Dham. He explained, Harikatha must be prominent in the mutt. There's no use in a building simply to facilitate eating and sleeping. The mutts should be built only to spread Harikatha. This will benefit us and others. So he's not mentioning any other program but the pure program of Lord Chaitanya. In this world of Maya, which is adverse to the Lord, full of trials and tribulations, only patience, humility, and respect for others are our friends for Hari Bhajan. So sometimes devotees are wondering why they're having, trouble in performing their devotional service. So here's a hint that patience, humility, and respect for others, these are our friends, and they will help us. And he promoted the Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's instructions in Shastakam, Param Vijayate Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Sri Krishna Sankirtan, is the only motto of the Gaudiya Math. So, in other words, the Supreme Personality of Krishna is the only enjoyer, and everyone and everything else is the object of his enjoyment. And he mentioned how anyone who does not serve Hari, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is ignorant and a killer of himself. So this is also reflected from Sri Isapanishad, the third verse, where it mentions Atmajanaha, the killer of the soul. The killer of the soul, whoever he may be, must enter into the planets known as the worlds of faithless and darkness and ignorance. So if we don't cultivate our service to Krishna, if we don't speak about Krishna, then we become this Atmajanaha, killer of the soul, ignorant. And then he said that one of the most important responsibilities for those who are living in the mutt. So, he's talking about living in the mutt, but that doesn't mean that if you're living, because most people nowadays don't live inside the temple. So the instruction is equally there. So learn to tolerate is one of the most important responsibilities of those living in the mutt, or those practicing Krishna consciousness. And another point that he brought out was that those who perform various, he used the word, assorted religious activities cannot serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we have to think about that carefully, that sometimes with the presumption that we are going to expand our preaching, we add a little of this and that from other traditions and other types, other like not only from, Hindu traditions. Srila Prabhupada, our Srila Prabhupada was very clear on this point. We're Vaishnavas. We are only interested in connecting to Krishna. And our only activities we're interested in are those who will connect us to Krishna. So naturally, for persons of Indian origin, coming from a Hindu background, there are many, many types of which you could say cultural traditions or cultural activities. But we learned in 1968, January, that these don't have any, they're simply that, a cultural activity, but they are not a connection to Krishna. What happened was one day a man came to our temple, an Indian man. And at that point in 68, there were not very many people from India. This was in San Francisco, by the way. So there weren't so many people from India. So if somebody from India came, we were always kind of overwhelmed, and we kind of assumed they must know more than we did. So this person came and he had some red strings and he said, "Today is Rocky." You all know what that is. So you're going to, you take, a string, you tie it on somebody, you become somebody's brother or somebody's sister. We thought, okay, so we all did that. And I remember myself and Dayananda, we still laugh about it. We became brother and sister, so-called. Well, Srila Prabhupada heard about it, even without the internet, even without WhatsApp, he heard about it. And he wrote a letter to Mukunda chastising, who's told you to do this? And then he explained that these are simply customs. We're not interested in these customs. We only want the activities which clearly connect us to Krishna. So Bhaktisiddhanta put out that we're not pious, sinful, learned, or ignorant. We are the carriers of the dust of the feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Hari. And we are initiated by the mantra, Kirtanaya Sada Hari, always chanting, in such a state of mind, always chanting. And he further admonished that my advice to you, do not criticize others. First, try to rectify yourself. That is one we can always, meditate on. And of course, if somebody is trying to help a person, naturally they can point out some maybe disadvantageous behavior, but we shouldn't do so just for merely criticizing. The only criticism should be to help a person overcome or rectify whatever anartha they may display. So a pure devotee knows that everyone is a spiritual master. So thus a pure devotee can be Jagat Guru. So we know in the Bhagavatam, there is the Avanti Brahman who had these 24 gurus. That's one way to look. And in Los Angeles, on one occasion, Srila Prabhupada said that all of us were his gurus. He said we'd been sent because we've been sent by his guru to assist him. He said we're all his gurus, but because we require training, he is doing that service. So that's a beautiful description of a spiritual master, that he is serving his disciples by training them. Another important instruction to consider was if we want to follow the path of true auspiciousness, we should give up the countless opinions of people and only hear the words of the Vedas. And nowadays, because of the easy access to the words of countless people of the world, all over the world, Haribol Internet, Haribol Facebook, Haribol, social media, so much stuff comes flying in our face. But, and it gets very confusing. People become very disturbed. So if we want the path of true auspiciousness, we have to give up these countless opinions. Don't even read them, just keep, move along, move away. Hear only the words from the Vedas, because there's no other way of associating with transcendence besides hearing. And he explained, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta explained, as soon as we lose the shelter of a protector, everything around us will become our enemy and attack us. and topics about Krishna spoken by a genuine saint are our only protector. So if one simply repeats in the words of the parampara and repeats the word of the previous acharyas, then we can be sure that we are not going to deviate, and nor will we deviate others. And if we start becoming involved in too many different other topics and too many other, mixing up traditions, it happens sometimes, we've seen that, then here he's saying we lose the shelter of a protector, and everything around us becomes our enemy and attacks us because we've taken ourselves out of Krishna's shelter. So and this is very interesting because he said it's better to remain in millions of species like birds, beasts, insects, and worms than to become deceitful. One who is free from deceit receives auspiciousness. So this is another very important instruction on sticking to the topic of Harikatha, of Krishna consciousness. And he explained that the only duty of a merciful person is to transform the degraded taste of people. Many, many times when people come to Krishna consciousness, they have so many bad habits, and they have bad habits mean also so many degraded tastes and attractions. And if nobody tells them and explains to them the need to give up these degraded behaviors, they'll continue on. Because sometimes nowadays, people are like thinking, well, we shouldn't disturb them. Well, if somebody falls in the water and is drowning and you're thinking you shouldn't disturb them by helping them get out, so everybody is drowning in the material world, drowning in illusion. Actually, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta says it's our duty to disturb them. Otherwise, they carry on in their ignorance. So, of course, that doesn't mean we go and, punch them, hit them on the head, etc. But we need to tell, it means we tell them the truth. We give them the truth. Bhaktisiddhanta said, a flatterer, one who flatters, he can never become a guru or a preacher. Because if we don't disturb the ignorant by our preaching, then we do not succeed. And he admonished his preachers that preaching without practice is nothing but a ritual of karmakanda. That our main disease in this material world is collecting objects not related to Krishna. So sometimes if we are feeling uncomfortable or unsettled in our Krishna consciousness, here's some little checklists kindly given by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and we can see, where am I failing? We'll not stay in this world for a long time. Only if this body falls singing of the glory of Hari Katha will our birth in this body be successful. How valuable is the holy name? Just like a couple of days ago, one of our dear godbrothers, His Grace Madhusudan Prabhu, left his body early in the morning, 1:30 in the morning, hearing Hari Katha. And for hours and hours beforehand, one very wonderful devotee, Yudhishthira Prabhu from San Diego, was sitting and along with other devotees chanting. And then Yudhishthira had collected all the letters Srila Prabhupada had written to Madhusudan, which were 17 letters. And he would read those letters from Srila Prabhupada. And even though Madhusudan Prabhu at this point could no longer speak, he could hear. And he was hearing as if his spiritual master was right there speaking to him. And he exhibited his hearing with a slight smile to his face. So, we are having, all of us, a short time on this earth. It may seem like he's 100 years old. Short time. Hamsapriya's dear mother is in the process of leaving her body. I went to visit with Kanka. Kanka told me brought me the other day, and we were able to chant for some time. And so many nice arrangements are being made for her to hear the holy name. This is the perfection of our human life. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is very clear that if this body falls singing the glory, hearing the glory that of Lord Krishna, our birth in this body is successful. In every birth, we'll get a father, we'll get a mother, but not every birth will guarantee getting instructions for the ultimate benefit. Sometimes the activities of a devotee and the behavior of a pseudo-devotee appear to be alike, But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said there's a heaven and hell difference between a pseudo-devotee and a real devotee. And he said, like milk and lime water. So, if you put some lime water in a glass, it turns white, and there's a glass of milk. You don't know the difference, but as soon as you taste it, you'll get it. So sometimes people mistake imitation to be following. Just like if somebody can put on tilak and put in sari, dhoti, stick their hand in the bead bag and mumble some words, doesn't mean they're actually glorifying Krishna or practicing Krishna consciousness. It could be imitation. Following is Srila Bhaktisiddhanta gave the example. The two words are not the same. To play the role of Narada Muni in a play is imitation. But to follow the path of devotional service according to Narada Muni is following. So thus following the order of the spiritual master will bring glory to our lives. And he pointed out, in order to teach us Krishna, in order to teach us how to serve him, the Supreme Personality of Godhead appears as the spiritual master. So the spiritual master is not like Krishna, but he's as good as Krishna because he's giving us Krishna and teaching us how to serve Krishna. So whenever there's material difficulties, which are pretty often nowadays, the Supreme Personality of Godhead becomes the shelter, and he allows us to serve him. Another very important thing to understand, as long as one has anarthas, one does not receive the good fortune of becoming a servant of Radharani. Those with anarthas, so this is coming from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, those with anarthas who discuss the transcendental pastimes of Srimati Radharani, the dearmost servitor of Sri Krishna, are sense gratifiers. They're covered in joy eaters. They're prakritya sahajas. In other words, one who is still attached to material sense gratification, that's an anartha. We cannot actually discuss these topics, these confidential topics. At one point, you may have heard this, it's a famous ISKCON story in the 70s during Prabhupada's presence. A group of his disciples got together in Southern California, and they started discussing the confidential topics of Srimati Radharani, which are in Prabhupada's books. This is a fact. But they were getting together and, having their private discussions. And there was even a name for the group. They were called the Gopi Baba Club. And when Srila Prabhupada heard about this, he was heavily disturbed. So we shouldn't presume to jump ahead of ourselves. You can ask, well, then why did he put it in his books? Well, it's there because he's expecting us to advance eventually. But so long as we still have anarthas within our heart, then we should be very respectful and understand that these topics are to be discussed confidentially by persons who are free from anarthas. I know there's that one, when King Kulashikar said that, when I think of sex life, I simply spit. I think you all know that. right? I simply spit when I think of sex life. So one day, one of his disciples said to Srila Prabhupada, when I think of sex life, I simply spit. So Prabhupada looked at this person and said, first become free from sex desire, then you can spit. So this becoming free from anartha is very important, and we should be very conscious of the need. Another wonderful, glorious instruction is, do not give up devotional service, even if there are innumerable dangers, countless insults, and endless harassment. Do not become disheartened that most people of this world do not accept the message of unalloyed devotional service. Never give up your devotional service and hearing and chanting about Krishna, which is our everything. Always chant the holy name, becoming more humble than a blade of grass and more tolerant than a tree. He instructed, if you stop preaching the unbiased truth due to fear that people will not like it, then you become atheistic. You'll lose your faith in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in the material world, there are only two representatives of the Personality of Godhead, the transcendental sound vibration of the holy name and his eternal transcendental deity incarnation. So for the pleasure of the Lord, his devotees call him by his holy name. We call him by his name. He's a person to render service to him and not to fulfill our own desires. The word devotion, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta explains this, the word devotion cannot be applied to anything or anyone besides Krishna. Krishna is the only object of devotion. Brahman is the object of knowledge. And Paramatma is the object of nearness. But Krishna is the only object of service. And Krishna is a person. Service means a person. So he said that what the ignorant masses think they understand about Krishna is not the real object of the word Krishna. So in other words, God, Allah, and even the Sanskrit words Ishvara and Paramatma, they only indicate a great energy coming out of Krishna, but they do not indicate the total aspect of Krishna, of the word Krishna. This is very important because nowadays I've found among members of the society that sometimes they intentionally refrain from mentioning Krishna's name. And instead they'll say the divine in place of saying Krishna. And when confronted, why aren't you saying Krishna's name? Oh, we don't want to offend anybody. So, okay, you're going to offend Krishna instead. So we are trying to give Krishna to the world. We're not trying to give an aspect of Krishna. We want to give Krishna as he is, full. And just to use this word divine in place of Krishna is shortcoming. It's not giving Krishna. It's just giving an aspect of Krishna. So our Srila Prabhupada, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada, he described his guru, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, as a Vaikuntha man. And today, we are blessed and humbled to worship and honor His Divine Grace on Vishnupad Paramahansa Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur on the occasion of his appearance day. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. So somehow, in spite of the interference of material nature, apparently it was PG&E, they cut off the power. We were able to continue this humble effort. I want to thank everybody for tolerating, and I hope that Many of you will be there at noontime for the Pushpa Abhishek. Is that right? It starts at noon?
No.
Oh, what time? Oh, okay. Well, from my understanding, there will be Pushpa Abhishek and Arti. So hopefully we will meet in person there with some of us.
Mother Malati, thank you very much for enlightening us in sharing Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's Prabhupada's glories. Wow, there's a lot of, the points that Bhaktivinoda Thakur's, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's points, like how he dressed up so nicely and, he wanted us to dress up and to give the eternal glories of the Lord. So it's just so relevant because, nobody would like to hear if we just walk in with the saffron cloth. So he could see all the way back.
He was wearing his cloth, but he would sometimes put on an overcoat. He always wore his dhoti.
Yeah. But I'm just saying that how much far back he was able to see forward that what the culture difference would be.
Yeah.
And then how he had a lot of options, even though he was so smart, he had a lot of options, but he chose to, carry forward his father's mission, his father's dream. He knew, even though he had a good opportunities for his personal growth, but he focused what really mattered. A lot of lessons. Thank you for sharing. It's really incredible. We are having the Pushpanjali because some of the devotees have to leave for work. So we are having Pushpanjali. We had it actually in the morning before work.
Okay.
So thank you very much. But there would be a plate of flowers, those who would like to go ahead and offer that.
Okay.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Does anyone have any reflections that you would like to share from Mother Malati's class?
Thank you very much, Mataji. Actually, we are so fortunate to hear from you on this auspicious day. And more importantly, you didn't only describe what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur mentioned, but also how Prabhupada made it relevant, because you all have personally seen what Prabhupada's mood was. We can now understand like what to do, what not to do, what is important, and not like get carried away by the customs and just worshipping the deities. Those are all like so much important points. Thank you so much, Malati Mataji.
Hare Krishna. Hare Bol. Thank all of you very much, and I hope that I'll see some of you at least later today. Hare Krishna.